Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just make sure I understand this correctly. The student has to be accepted by the private school before they can get the voucher or the ESA?
Yes, that has to occur, or there would be nothing to use the funding on.
And there's no
if you were
requirement-
seeking that route.
And there's no requirement in the bill that the private school must accept a student who is applying for this program?
No, there's not. We don't change any requirements or enrollment requirements or anything from our private schools.
So the ultimate decision about who participates lies with the private school, not the parent. Is that correct?
Well, it just depends on, how you, I mean, there are, a couple of things. Most of our private schools evaluate applications totally blind to income. They don't verify your income. And so what they're basing on is enrollment or based on other factors than income. But yes, I mean, a child would have to be enrolled in the private school. And that's a process that thousands of kids go through all the time in Texas.
And that was a yes to my question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
The ultimate decision lies with the private school, not the parent.
Well, yeah.
And so, I mean, it's not so much school choice as it is the school's choice. Is that correct?
Not at all, because, I mean, this bill opens up all kinds of pathways for parents. And so, when a parent is directing the process, that's the difference. Just like in our public schools, we have many public schools that are application-based. A lot of kids want to go to early college, high school, but if you don't score high enough on the TSIA, you can't get in there. If you want to go to a certain magnet school, I mean, the fact that there is a certain requirements for enrollment is not something that is foreign to public schools. It is seen in education throughout whatever sector it operates in.
What are some of the reasons that a private school can deny admission to a student?
Well, I think it's based on their decision to what if they can meet the needs of that child, what particular needs are of that child. I mean, in a private school in my district, there's a school that has about 98%, I believe, of the enrollment are kids with special needs, and they would make sure that a child that applied or parent that applied on behalf of their child, that they understand of just the types of services that they provide, and that's the process of parent directed. The parent has the choice and the ability to find the pathway that is best for their child.
Well, we just established that it's the private school's choice, not the parents'. But
not
on
entirely.
On the reasons that you can be denied, can a private school deny admission to a student because of academics, because of behavior, because they're not the right cultural fit? Are all of those reasons that a private school can deny a student admission?
I think the private schools will have their own standards of admissions that they will apply whenever applications are received.
So is it true that
certainly not based on race? I think here's where I think we look. The parent. We just assume the parent doesn't know what's best for their kid, and so that's the assumption that we're sort of laying the groundwork. Okay, parents don't know. If we don't have some other entity that's making this decision, the parents will find the pathway that best fits their kids. Parents do that every day, whether it be a public school transfer, whether it be moving from one public school district to another, or whether it be, once this bill passes, a private option. And that's I think where our fundamental difference is on that.
I don't think that's a fundamental difference, because I don't think anyone on this dais doesn't agree that parents should have decisions and choices in public education. In fact, members of this committee, including myself, have worked to make sure there are more options. There are more public charter schools, more magnets, more early college high schools, more academies, more PTECs, more career and technical education. Yeah. Those are all options that are open enrollment.
Not really.
That don't.
Sir, not to interrupt you, but those are not open enrollment schools.
That don't.
Those are application-based schools in many instances, at least in my district.
All of those options that I just mentioned cannot discriminate against a student because of their religion, because of how much money their parents make, because they're not the right cultural fit, because of their past behavior. I mean, all of those things are going to be new in this system. And so to try to use parental choice or parental freedom as a guise for this program, I think is an insult to the people who have done hard work on this committee to empower parents with more options and more choices. We just walked through how this bill could require that the private school accept students who get an ESA, who get a voucher under this program. We could do that, but we're not doing that. We are allowing the private school to have the ultimate power in this equation. And so I resent the effort to use parents as a shield for this push for privatization. I want to ask about low income, because again, what I'm trying to do is align this bill with the rhetoric, right? There's lots of rhetoric about how we want to help parents, we want to help low income kids. And I do a lot of bipartisan work on this committee. I always try to take everyone at their word about what they're trying to do. And so what I'm seeing is a disconnect between that rhetoric and what the bill actually says. Is there an income cap? If this bill is for low-income kids, is there a cap on income? Is there a limit to what kind of families can access this program, can access these taxpayer funds?
Any family is eligible to apply, but it is prioritized based upon learning needs and then family income.
Okay.
But there's not a cap.
So let's talk about that, because this prioritization sounds good when you first hear it. I think when you start to read the fine print, read the terms and conditions, what I'm worried about is that the money is going to cascade to the top, that students who we say we are prioritizing actually can't get admitted, because we just said you have to be admitted to get the money. They may not have a private school in their area. As you know, Chairman, a majority of counties in the state of Texas don't have a single private school in them, a lot of our rural communities and small towns. Or the private school doesn't provide transportation or special education programs, and so there's no meeting the students' needs at the private school. Or the voucher doesn't cover the full cost of tuition. So if you gave my former students on the west side of San Antonio a $10,000 voucher, there's still no way they could afford a $20,000 a year private school. So for any of those reasons, whether it's admission denied, there's no private school in your area, they don't provide transportation or special ed, or you can't cover the difference between the voucher, I'm worried that who we're saying is prioritized is actually not going to get enrolled, is actually not going to get the money. And so what will end up happening is we're going to run through, this has happened in every other state that's tried this, we're going to run through priority 1, priority 2, even priority 3, and the majority of the users of this voucher program will be priority 4, which are people that are a lot wealthier than most families in Texas and who already have their kids in private school. This is what we've seen in every state that's tried this. I looked for a state where a majority of the users were low income or weren't already in private school, couldn't find a state. So couldn't we in this bill cap the income, meaning millionaires and billionaires cannot take advantage of this program? We could do that, right, as a legislature?
We can do whatever we want to do, but the reality is you need a universal program that gives access, that's prioritized in a way that meets the needs of the most vulnerable. If you
Mr.
look
Chairman,
across different states, in Arizona, for instance, 58% of the families in the program earn less than $80,000. I mean, it's just fact, and I think the data is not as clear as you make it. In other words, there are, in state after state, parents that are not wealthy are accessing these programs and making decisions on behalf of their kids to take them where to put them in the school they feel like is best for their kids.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not doubting that there are some folks who can take access to this program. I'm asking about the majority of users of the program. Mm-hmm. And you just said we have to prioritize and give access to low-income kids, but in the same breath, you said we can't stop millionaires and billionaires from participating. So if this is for low-income kids, why don't we do that? Why don't we cap the income to make sure that it's not wealthier families who take advantage of this like in other states? I don't understand why we wouldn't just put that in the bill if that's our true intention.
Well, the bill is prioritized based on income. And, the reality is that you will see parents exercising their right to act on behalf of their kids. And really, I'm not making an accusation, but the inference that simply because you're not wealthy that you can't access these programs or you're not up, that somehow lower-income families won't do this, is just not true. Lower-income families will apply and do apply all over the country and access these programs to provide what's best for their kids. And so look at that. Income, in reality, it is mixed all over through all our different school systems. We have school systems, public schools that are very, very wealthy and some that are others. And the fact is that, there will always be rich people that go to public schools. And I would argue that there are more millionaire, billionaire kids going to public school than there ever will be in private school through this. Because I know the private schools in my district, I know the kids that go there, and many families are struggling and foregoing vacations, college savings for retirement, to do things to make sure their kids in the best environment.
So this is, I think, gets to a key point. Are kids who are already in private school eligible for this program?
Yes.
So if all the rhetoric around this bill is helping kids who are in struggling public schools go to elite private schools, because that sounds great.
It's not my rhetoric.
So, well, maybe not be your rhetoric,
No,
but it's the people
my
pushing this bill.
rhetoric is helping families provide the best option for their kids. And I just view kids as kids.
So, Mr. Chairman, if those who are pushing this bill outside this chamber are using kids in public schools as the justification for the bill, why don't we prioritize or give preference to kids who are currently in public school over kids who are currently in private school?
Because I think that parents will make that decision. A parent every day, the decisions that my wife and I made for our kids was to take them to a different public school setting from what we were zoned, and that's a decision that we made. The fact is that there are parents now that are working families with kids with special needs struggling mightily to find an environment where their kids can succeed, and they are it's entirely proper for them to have access and opportunity to have some relief from what they're having to do. They pay their taxes, they're good citizens, and oh, by the way, they pay tuition for their kids to put them in an environment that fits their kids' needs the best. And this bill reflects that, and it's a very important, I think it's a very important distinction.
So you brought up Arizona earlier. I'm looking at the analysis of that program. It says in Arizona, more advantaged communities are securing a highly disproportionate share of the funds from the state's Empowerment Scholarship Account program. Families in the poorest communities are the least likely to obtain ESA funds. The same is true in looking at a study from out of Florida. So, and like I said, this is happening in all the states that are trying vouchers, that it is not only helping the wealthier families, but it is also disproportionately helping families who are already sending their kids to private school. Meaning, in Arkansas, it's 95% kids already in private school. In Florida, it's 70%. This is across the board. And so I guess what I'm saying is that in this bill, in our crafting of this bill, we could say that over a certain income, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, $1 billion a year, you can't take these taxpayer funds. We could also say that kids who are in public school get priority. Kids who are currently in public school are preferenced over kids who are already in private school. My concern is that we're going to be taking money that could go to the basic allotment. We spent all last week hearing about how the basic allotment needs to be higher, that our schools are in crisis. Instead of spending that $1 billion, I guess it's $7 billion in the next biennium, instead of spending that $7 billion on public schools, on our basic allotment, and on charters and academies and magnets and other real school choice options, instead we're giving that money to wealthier parents who are already sending their kids to private school. And we could change that in this bill. Again, I take the rhetoric at face value. I'm just trying to align that rhetoric with what's in the bill, and I'm not seeing that.
Okay. Again, every parent in Texas deserves the right to make one of the most important decisions that they have to do as a parent, to have that freedom to make a decision on behalf of where their kids are educated. I just want, and the intent of the bill is just to look at kids as kids. We want to put them in buckets. We want to say, well, you're a public school kid, you're a private school kid, you're this kid, you're that kid. This just looks at kids. And I don't have a microscope into the inner workings of every family. And I can tell you there are parts, and right now, after 4 years of runaway inflation, there are families that earn $120,000, $150,000 a year, and you have 4 or 5 kids. It's a struggle. I mean, that's not, it's not, it's not always, it's difficult for us to make those judgments. But I do know that I trust parents to make the best decision for their kids. And for some, and I think it'll be a small number over time, there'll be some kids in private school, some kids like those families struggling in Killeen, Texas, at Oak Creek, that are that really, I'm talking working families, working military, members of the military that are struggling to provide the environment for their kids. And the fact that we would somehow leave them out and say, well, you've already struggled, you're not included, to me is just unconscionable.
Mr. Chairman, I want to say this very clearly, just because I think I'm going to hear this all day. I also think parents should be the ones making decisions for their kids. Yeah. I doubt anyone on this committee disagrees with that. What I'm saying is a family making over $500,000 a year shouldn't get my taxpayer dollars to make that decision. I'm not trying to prevent them from making a decision. Is anyone on this dais proposing that we make it illegal to go to a private school? I'm not proposing that. I don't think anyone here is proposing that. What we're talking about is, are we sending our limited, precious taxpayer dollars to the wealthiest families in the state who are already sending their kids to private school? And if you say that's not the purpose, then put it in your bill.
75% of the prioritization levels are families earning $160,000 or less. 75%.
Again, prioritization is not enrollment. We just established that. Yeah. You can say someone is prioritized, that they're eligible. That doesn't mean they can actually get in. Again, the prioritization is, in a lot of states, is window dressing, because what matters is who actually gets the funds, who actually gets admitted, or who's already been admitted, right? It's much easier to get these funds if you already have your kids in private school, because you've cleared the biggest hurdle. Yeah. And so that's, again, why the majority of states have seen the majority of the funding goes to wealthier parents who already have their kids in private school. And I'm just saying, you oftentimes bring up these more sympathetic cases. And again, if this bill was limited to low-income people or even middle-class people, then we could have that conversation. But do you think that our taxpayer funds should go to a family making over $500,000 a year who's already sending their kid to private school?
I think parents deserve the right to make that decision.
No, that's not my question. That's not my question. And Mr. Chairman, you and I have worked closely together. You're my friend.
Yeah.
I know your heart is for kids. I do. I'm just trying to, I really want an answer to this question. Do you think our taxpayer dollars should go to a family making over $500,000 a year who are already sending their kids to private school? Because that's the question, not a low-income family. We could have that conversation. Not even a working class, middle class family. We could have that conversation. But your bill allows for literally millionaires to take money that could go to public schools to subsidize their private school tuition. Are you okay with that? Or should we work on that part of the bill?
I think parents deserve that right. And I think the bill is prioritized to make sure that that those kids that we can all agree are the most vulnerable are prioritized to receive the assistance. And as about sympathetic characters, that is, well, I don't really know, and I know you don't mean it that way, but it's a real thing. It's a real thing when a family struggles.
Of course.
It is. And I also, like I said, I don't have a microscope into the lives of every family. And I think that it's a red herring to talk about millionaires and billionaires accessing this, because and I think you'll hear testimony later today that will dispute the fact that these end up in the hands of rich folks. We know that you will hear from families that were working families and others that are just folks out there trying to make a living that just need a different option for their kids.
Do you think people making over $500,000 a year are struggling?
Not as much as some.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions. The last thing I'll say is this is our sixth hearing on vouchers in 2 years. We have not had 6 hearings on teacher pay. We have not had 6 hearings on student discipline. We have not had 6 hearings on student mental health. We've not had 6 hearings on arts education, something that you and I are very passionate about. But this is our 6th hearing on vouchers. And so I want to say something that I think everybody already knows, which is that there are very powerful forces pushing this issue on us. This is not about education, it's about politics. And Mr. Chairman, I am not doubting your sincerity bringing this particular bill. I'm not. I want to talk about just this issue of vouchers generally, because no other issue comes with this level of bullying, this level of bribing, this level of billionaire backing. 6 of our colleagues sacrificed their seats over this issue. 6 of the finest legislators I know, including one of my best friends in the legislature, one of my legislative classmates, Chairman Reggie Smith. There were only 2 people in our legislative class because Reggie and I were both elected in special elections. He always said he was the valedictorian of our class, and I was the salutatorian. We were in different parties. We disagreed on a whole lot, but we both supported our public schools, and for that, he was targeted. Along with 5 of our other colleagues, he was buried under a mountain of big lies and big money, and all of that because of this issue. I've never had so many colleagues, including Republican colleagues, including some who are signed on to this bill, privately tell me they hate this issue because it is not about education, it's about politics. There are powerful forces trying to dismantle public education in this state and across the country. As a former public school teacher, as a product of Texas public schools, I can't stay silent. I won't stay silent. And honestly, I'm so glad to see so many Texans here at their state capitol who refuse to be silent as well. And so I'm looking forward to a passionate debate about this because I do think this is maybe the most consequential policy that I've ever seen come through this body in my 4 terms. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to just make a couple points, and then I know we want to get to witnesses and our public testimony, so I'll be brief. One, I just wanted to respond to Representative Schoolcraft and Representative Leah Wilson, both friends of mine, dismissing millionaires and billionaires. There are about 650,000 households in Texas that are millionaire households, so not an insignificant number. What I'm more concerned about is families making $600,000, $500,000, $400,000, $300,000, $200,000, taking taxpayer money that could be going to our underfunded public schools. And if we think millionaires and billionaires are kind of insignificant, then why not just ban them from participating in the bill? Right? Again, I think there's ways we can work together to make this bill better. That's one area I would recommend is let's just cap income. Representative Schoolcraft, I know you've served here before in the 1980s, and so I don't want to cast aspersions on folks who are pushing this bill. I just want to call out what their interests are, whether it's financial or ideological. Milton Friedman, you mentioned, has an ideological commitment to privatization. We've seen what that privatization has done in healthcare. We've seen what it's done in higher ed. We've seen what it's done in childcare, where those things are no longer public goods, but they are now out of reach for most working class people. I refuse to let that happen to our K through 12 public education system. And I'll also point out the first voucher bill was proposed in the legislature here in Texas in 1957, 3 years after the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down from the Supreme Court. That first voucher bill was a deliberate attempt to resegregate public schools, to allow white parents to take their students out of newly integrated public schools and send them to white-only private schools. Thankfully, Texans defeated that voucher scam in '57, and we've defeated them every decade since, including 2 years ago. I hope the same remains true this year. I also, we've talked a lot about special education. I know we're probably going to hear from witnesses. I do just, again, from my experience as an educator, there is a vast spectrum of disabilities and special needs. Things that take less intensive resources, things like ADHD, versus severe developmental or physical disabilities. And so when we talk about private schools serving a lot of special needs kids, I think it's important to dive into where on that spectrum are we looking at. There are only 70 private schools in Texas that have a special education program. Again, different if you have a kid with ADHD in your school, that's different than having a special education program. There are only 70 that have that. The average tuition at those 70 private schools is $19,000 a year, far more than the voucher. But I would say that if we took the $30,000 that Chairman Buckley you've put in your bill, if we gave that to public schools, they could have a lot more options to serve those high-cost needs in a public school setting without giving up their IDEA rights, which they do if they have to go to a private school. So I guess the broader point I'm trying to make is there's a general attitude that we can do both. We can support our public schools and we can give our money to private schools. I really want to question that assumption. We have limited state dollars. We have limited taxpayer funds. And everything we do is a choice here. If we're going to spend $7 billion, which the fiscal note, I believe, is $7 billion for the second biennium for this program, that $7 billion could do a lot in our public schools. There's this, I've heard before that, we've been trying to fix public education and it's not working. We're 44th in the nation in per student education funding. I mean, we're not trying very hard, in my opinion. And so, if we spent $7 billion for our special education programs in public schools, we could hire more than 100,000 new paraprofessionals, an army of paraprofessionals. We could give every SPED teacher a $70,000 pay raise. We could double their salary with $7 billion. So again, everything is a choice when we're talking about taxpayer funds, and I worry that we are making a disastrous choice with this bill. The last comment I want to make.
Representative Talarico, just briefly, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Sure.
The bill caps special education ESAs at 30,000.
Yes.
That's not the basis for it.
Yes.
Okay, so that will vary based on the IEP.
Of course.
And then have members direct themselves to the fiscal note to show there's not a $7 billion impact. So
There's not a $7 billion impact in the second biennium?
no,
What is the cost in the second biennium?
3.3
A year or
Yeah.
for the biennium?
per year,
And so what is it total for the biennium?
6 something.
6 something?
Yeah. But what?
6 point.
Okay.
So I think
talk-
when you start to look into what this bill starts to grow, not only in the first biennium, but into the second, into 5 years out, you're looking at something very close to $7 billion. And I mean, I'm looking at the fiscal note right now, and that's the calculation I'm getting when you start to add up all these numbers. But whether or not you want to say it's 6 point something or 7 billion. But my point is that funding, if we put it into the basic allotment, which we heard all last week from every school district, that's where we could do the most good, or if we put it into special education, it could be transformative. And so by making the decision not to put that $6 or $7 billion into our public schools, and we allow inflation to keep eating at our public schools, we are defunding them, even if no public school students ever take advantage of the voucher program. Let's just say it all goes to kids who are currently in private school. There are 250,000 private school kids in Texas. There are more homeschool kids in Texas. It's looking like maybe 1 million new kids that could be drawing from our general revenue. So even if no public school kids ever leave a public school and go to a private school, we would be defunding our public schools because of inflation and because of the opportunity costs of not investing that $6 or $7 billion into our system. I agree with Chairman Dutton. There's nothing magical about a private school. They just have more funding and less testing. 2 things we could do for public schools today if we wanted to help the 5.5 million Texas school children. I personally, maybe this is just my Texan pride, but I think there's nothing our Texas public schools can't do if we give them the resources and the tools to be successful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to, since we talked about 1957.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
The reason the reason the voucher bill died in '57 is because Henry B. Gonzalez, a Democrat, filibustered for 22 hours to stop the bill from going to place. I also want to agree that I don't think the goal here is racial segregation in 2025.
Okay, good.
I agree with that. And this is not just me as a Democrat saying this, because Republicans and Democrats in the legislature oppose this voucher bill. Republicans and Democrats across the state oppose this voucher bill. Conservative Republican state senator, our colleague Senator Nichols, conservative Republican from East Texas, when he voted against the voucher bill in the Senate just a few weeks ago, he wrote in the Journal, "I truly do not believe the intent of education savings account is to promote segregation in any way, but the reality is that it will. The new form of segregation will be by income and ability, and it will be separate and inherently unequal." So this is not a Democrat saying that. This is our Republican State Senator Nichols saying this. I want to just double check I understand the fiscal note. I did go back. It was $7 billion in the next biennium. I think you're including some estimated savings for public schools. My point that I made earlier is that this could move forward where we don't have any students from public schools participating in this program because they're denied admission or they can't take access for all the reasons we've already mentioned. Is it true, Mr. Chairman, that the fiscal note is estimating that a majority of the voucher participants will be students that are already in private school?
It makes certain assumptions about the uptake and where those kids are now. And like I said, this bill doesn't make it doesn't distinguish.
But I'm saying the nonpartisan estimate, fiscal impact of this bill estimates that a majority of the students participating in this program will already be in private school.
Yes, some may be currently in private school, absolutely.
No. I'm not saying some.
Well-
I'm saying a majority. Look right here. At least 65% of the participants in this program, according to your bill analysis, will be students who are already in private school right now. That goes up to 79% in 2028.
Well, and some of those are kids that would fall over to the next year. You've got kids that are kindergartners that are moving in. I mean,
But
there's
a ma-
all sorts of potential decisions parents will make that will impact that.
Let me put it this way. Will a minority of users be students who are in public schools leaving the public school to go to a private school in this estimate?
That is their estimate. I
Okay.
think it remains to be seen what parents decide.
Okay, so that's
And,
why.
and if parents are as pleased with public schools as my wife and I were, then they won't choose to leave.
Right, and so taxpayer dollars that could have gone to the public school are now going to go to kids who are already in private school, helping to pay their tuition. This is your estimate. Or not your estimate, but this is the fiscal note that we have in front of us. So
And you're making an assumption that kids that are currently attending private school, or somehow, we don't know what their experience had been in public school. We don't know why they're there. I think it was very important to me to make sure that parents that are struggling now, or any parent has access to receive an ESA. And if that's
fine. That's fine. I would just want us to be transparent because we're talking a lot about helping kids in public schools go to a private school. Where in fact,
I'm talking about helping kids.
Sure.
I mean, I think that's the distinction, is that we've kind of got off into this deal where it's going to hurt public schools. Well, then nobody in public school can get it. But then if they do, there's no place for them to go. The reality is when you create a program of choice, you just give parents a tool to use to make that decision. And I know I keep saying that over and over again, but that's really the foundation of what this is built upon.
Yeah,
it is built upon that choice.
I don't think we're saying different things, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
okay.
I just want to make clear that $7 billion, instead of going to public schools, are going to go to subsidize tuition for parents who are already sending their kids to private school.
Well,
I'm just looking at the
remember,
numbers.
those are not dollars that are currently in the system.
They could go to public schools, though, right?
They could go to roads. They
Sure,
could go to
that sounds great, too.
healthcare. They could,
So instead
we
of-
make those decisions, budgetary decisions, every session.
Exactly.
About where dollars go.
Exactly.
But last week we had a bill before this committee that I appreciate members that are already weighing in on it, but we're working on. We'll make the largest investment in public schools in the history of Texas, and we'll continue to work on that, and we can do both.
The estimate is that this will dwarf that number in just a few years that you're putting in HB2. But you're exactly making my point that we have a choice. Instead of putting this toward public schools, roads, healthcare, water, we are sending it to parents who are already sending their kids to private school. You can defend that. I think that is a catastrophic decision and an immoral decision. The last two questions, last 2 points I'll make is we hear a lot about average tuition.
You know, it's not immoral for the military family with a child that's on the spectrum that has, you know, worked through the system only to have to leave a public school where their kids are not receiving the services that they believe is in the best interest of their child. You know, I don't know if I want to wade into the morality.
I'm fine wading into the
argument.
morality. I'm
Yeah.
saying to deprive the students that I used to teach on the west side of San Antonio, or students in the third ward of Houston, or students in the Rio Grande Valley, or students in small towns around the state, we're going to give it to families making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year. That is immoral, at least in my morality. Now, the point I wanted to make is that average tuition has been brought up. We need to be looking at average costs, because there's a lot more costs that go into a private school than just tuition. Tuition's a major part of it, but there's uniforms, there's transportation, there's food that normally a public school would cover. So I want us to be talking about average cost of private schools going forward, not just average tuition.
And the bill does allow for those expenditures.
Of course, yes. But when we're talking about how much the cost is, does the voucher cover it? I wanted to make sure we're talking about cost. Last thing I want to make, and this is to my dear friend, Chairman Frank, co-chair of the James Caucus. The idea that there are superintendents or school leaders making money as a school leader, that's certainly true, but to compare that to the billionaire mega donors that are pushing this bill, I haven't seen a superintendent who gave Governor Abbott $12 million last year. But I do know that Jeff Yass, the billionaire in Pennsylvania that gave the money to pass this bill, he is connected with Odyssey, which will be applying to be one of the vendors under this bill. So I just want to make sure we're having that conversation. I'm not casting aspersions on Chairman Frank. There is concern that some of the people who have a lot more money than the superintendents pushing this bill also have connections with some organizations that will be applying to be vendors. And I want us all to investigate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.